I didn't realize there were that many houses.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the August 14th, 2023 Grants Pass City Council Workshop. And today we're talking about some work in Riverside Park. Looks like Brad's coming up to do the presentation.
All right, good morning. So as you mentioned, Mayor, we have two topics today, both of them dealing with Riverside. We're going to start out with talking about the Reed Building and the caretaker's cottage. And then Josh, our park superintendent, is going to come up and talk more specifically about the maintenance yard. So on the Reed Building, you have received two motions from the Historical Building and Sites Commission. And both of them relate to this structure and relates to two of your council goals there. July 13th was the date that HBSC made the motions. Both motions pertain to the Reed Building, and here's the first one. Chair Warren moved and Vice Chair McConnell seconded the motion that the Riverside Park Caretaker's House be recognized as a local historic landmark and that it receives a local landmark bronze plaque similar to those on the historic buildings downtown. So as most of you I think know, there's a difference between a National Register recognition and a local landmark. The Riverside Park is on the National Register, and the house being a part of Riverside Park is also on the National Register, but that does not automatically put you onto a local City of Grants Pass landmark list. So that is the recommendation from HBSC to the council, is to proceed with that process to put the house on the local landmark list. The second motion was by Commissioner Miller and seconded by Chair Warren, and it has to do with a little bit more of the money side of the equation here, and that's to put some funding into repair and maintenance of the building and stop any deterioration, preserve its opportunity for future use. As some of the councilors are now aware, we had a tour this morning. There are a number of issues with the structure, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So here's the location for you, any members of the public. On the Riverside Park, we're talking about the house that's located on Park Street, right just south of the existing maintenance building. If you haven't seen it, the read on the National Register nomination by George Kramer, the city's historic consultant, is actually quite interesting. This is an image that was taken from his report that was submitted to the National Park Service, and dated 1939. So you can see Caveman Bridge, which is there, and then just barely make out here the Reed House that was at that point probably about 19 years old. So here's the view from the Park Street side of the building. Has been painted, according to Chad, at least once in the last 15, 20 years or so. There is a couple other photos here looking from the side, from the park side of it, and then from the rear. Here's a couple of shots from the interior of the building. Our building official did walk through the structure last week, and it was a pretty quick review assessment. So he was careful to say don't hold anything because we haven't done any real detailed work. But in his initial review, one of the key issues is the fact that there's no foundation, that has caused several of the rooms in there to warp, and so the floors do warp in several of the rooms. There is some issues that has caused, upwards in the structure as you go vertical. On the exterior, here's some of the other visible issues in terms of dry rot and moss particularly on that north side of the structure. So moving ahead in terms of how you proceed with the HBSC motion that's in front of you, a couple of key things to consider, as I mentioned, the National Register nomination. 1920 Riverside Park was added, 2020 Riverside Park was added to the National Register. The caretaker's cottage, built in 1920, is one of 13 contributing historic resources that were identified by George Kramer that are inside Riverside Park. That's important in the sense that just because the house itself individually is not on the National Register, the fact that it is a part of the Riverside Park does give it the same status as though it was individually put on the register. So one way to think about that might be like a district, like the historic district, and think of Riverside Park, as a district, and it has multiple structures. It has some archaeological elements there, so those are all things to take into consideration. The last bullet there, as a city-owned historic resource, major work on the structure is subject to ORS 358.653. And here are the three main points of what that ORS says. Any state agency or political subdivision, we are a political subdivision, responsible for real property, which this building is, of historic significance, in consultation with SHPO, shall institute a program to conserve the property and assure that such property shall not be inadvertently transferred, sold, demolished, substantially altered, or allowed to deteriorate. I spoke with our consultant on this and also got some information from the State Historic Preservation Office. What that first bullet is really saying is deferring us back to Section 106, or at least a similar process, and you may be familiar with that. That's the Section 106 is the federal program that if you have any federal property that is going to have some significant work done to it, you have to go through a Section 106 review to identify, any potential archaeological evidence, resources that are on the property. There is a mitigation option, so if and this does of course happen across the country, you get into a situation where a historic resource just absolutely has to be either moved or demolished. A good example is road widening. When you don't have any choice, you have to move a structure. So that Section 106 kicks in, and the mitigation usually has to do with setting up some kind of like alternative program. So for example, documentation. Setting up a website, creating kiosks that show kind of the history. Another option is and we did this at the old dairy in Meridian when I was there on Section 106, and that was to, have very detailed photographs taken and then set up in the local museum, kind of a section that had a lot of the history and had the architect of the building, things like that. There's a number of things, but the key thing here is that you have to involve the Oregon State Historic Preservation Office because city owns it, it's on the register. You do not have the option to just proceed without any negotiation and consultation with SHPO. We've already talked about this a little bit. It's built in 1920. It's wood frame, it's gable roof cottage, originally a caretaker's residence. Some of the expected conditions with the structure, and this is coming from Ken, our building official: lead mediation, asbestos mediation, dry rot, foundation issues. Here's a few thoughts on preservation versus demolition. So some factors to consider. Either significant rehab or demolition requires a public hearing. That's part of our Article 13 in our local code. Hazardous material survey, complete a complete versus a partial removal of the structure. That may be something to look at. As you that took the tour today noticed, the windows are actually in pretty decent shape on that building. They kind of have the gridded, and so there may be some opportunity to reuse, some kind of adaptive reuse on that. Grading work, if it's demolished, there's going to be some of that involved. There's two electrical services that are on the side of the building. Those would have to be relocated. Sewer and water abandonment is all part of a normal demolition permit through community development. The approximate cost of preservation, we were unable to, get very detailed in some of this just to we wanted to get a sense for where the council's at, but it certainly likely exceeds 150,000. Staff's recommendation would be, if your choice is to move forward with preservation, we would really want to look at the entire structure, because you don't want to just preserve this, the roof or just preserve the one. I mean, you really have to look at the whole structure. On the demolition side, it would probably be around 17,000. That's abatement of some of the hazardous materials that are on site, as well as, just all the labor to hire a company to do that. In terms of the revenue source, there is LB 6395. There's a $385,000 cash balance in there, but that is intended for several of the main capital projects in Riverside Park, or the Reed building, the maintenance shop, which Josh is going to talk about next, Riverside Stage. Riverside Park is fully within the urban renewal area, the agency boundaries. There is $1.7 million in the urban renewal area plan. The $254,000 that's in the Isaac Walton account, council had directed us to use that for the stage. So at this point, that's why we put unavailable, because a prior directive from council was to have those funds reserved for that project. So it's at your discretion. A few alternatives are there. For the preservation side, you could identify potential uses and reuses of the structure, contract with a historic preservation consultant to give a more detailed assessment. We could look at pursuing historic preservation grant funding. Since it's on the register, it is likely, well, it would be eligible to apply for a couple of different grants. Obviously, we don't know for sure if we get those, but it would be eligible to apply for that. In terms of demolition, soliciting bids, directing us to file that HBSC application, that actually would probably apply on the upper one too, depending on the scale of remodel. That may also involve HBSC review, and then look at other options. One thing I failed to mention on the Section 106 reviews, which SHPO does, one of the main things they want to see is public engagement. Which we have not done in terms of just really, reaching out to see what is the public sentiment about the structure in terms of proceeding. So that would be something we would really need to demonstrate to the state that we have, made some effort to reach out and find out what the Grants Pass community would like to see there. So.
Thanks, Brad.
Yep.
Council, do you have questions? Rick?
Thank you, Brad. Could you go back to slide 13? So the middle paragraph there said, there is a potential to lease the real property to a private business. So if a private business came and said, we're willing to spend $150,000 or $200,000 in there, we would have the opportunity to lease it to them, and then theoretically, then we, the city, would not incur any cost in the renovation?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but what the statute is saying is, yes, as a political subdivision, when you're dealing with a historic resource, they're encouraging you to look at all options. So, similar to Reinhardt, we have River Vista House, which we do lease out, so that we have other assets that the city owns that that we lease out to for different purposes. But so it's certainly an option.
Okay, thank you.
Val?
And so on that same slide, it's my understanding that no matter which way we go, we are going to have to reach out to SHPO, correct?
Correct.
And from what I'm understanding, we're also, since they're going to want some public input, going to have to do some sort of something locally to have people come take a look at it and talk about what options are available and things. So it seems to me that that's just the natural thing to do, is to start doing public awareness of the fact that we are looking at that. And personally, I think it's in pretty bad shape, and I can't imagine putting a lot of money into it, but I think it's important that we put it out there and have other people see that, and then, anyway, so that would be my thoughts, because those are the two things that we have to do.
We do, yep. And then there would be, at the end of that, some type of formal memorandum of agreement that the city would enter into with the State Historic Preservation Office that would outline what those steps are.
Joel?
So Brad, if I understand correctly, the building is already on the Federal Register as part of the Riverside Park
Yep.
designation.
Correct.
Okay, one of the motions was for the local register. And then, so being on the Federal Register, it automatically qualifies for the local register, is that correct?
It does qualify in the sense that it's part of a national register property. We do have, a few different standards in Article 13. If you're going to make a local landmark happen, that you have to look at. And of course, the architecture itself is only one reason that you would potentially create a landmark. Sometimes it's because a historic event happened on a location. Sure. There's other things that we would look at as a landmark, but so we generally don't think of it as like automatic just because it's on the national, because you do still have a public hearing and, we have local findings, but
Sure.
I think to get to the heart of your question, yes,
Okay, so we really have, that's almost like a finding of fact, does it qualify as a local historic thing? That to me, I don't sure anybody here at the council has that expertise. Some people on the commission do, but the archaeologist certainly does as to whether it qualifies or not. And if it qualifies, then SHPO gets involved, which SHPO is going to be involved. So that first motion almost seems to me like a no-brainer, and it's just a finding of fact. The second one, we have some options, and it deals with the funding. And you list the different alternatives. Where's that slide where you listed the alternatives? For the second motion of what to do with it. And one was to demolish it and document it.
Here, yeah.
Which can occur, and it has occurred. And then it gets, may have a little bronze plaque or something there that would designate it. Or the other is to preserve it for future generations. And it's expensive if the city does that, and the city doesn't have the money, correct? Well, we have money, but we have alternative uses for that money that are probably a little higher priority. So I was wondering if, geez, $150,000. I lived in a town where half the town didn't have foundations. Now, that's not normal for Grants Pass, but it's very doable. And when you bought one of them, you bought it cheap, and you put a foundation in, you raised the building up, and it was just what you did. The commercial opportunity there, when I look at Central Park, or I look at other municipalities that need their parks. They don't use their parks, well, they also use them, but they need them as economic development to attract tourism. The partnership with the private sector is very important. And this is an opportunity to at least explore that on their dime. $150,000 to put up a restaurant in that location, or some kind of refreshment stand or whatever, I would think would pencil out. But I'm not the only way we could find out is to put it out for a
Right.
proposal.
Yeah.
Is my understanding. Does that make sense to you?
Sure, no, I mean, those are all good points. On your point about the foundation, we really, at this point, don't know much other than, as Josh
Sure.
pointed out today, it's got those piers underneath there, but,
Right.
but Ken did say, I mean, if you want it, you're gonna have to pick the whole thing up, you're gonna have
Sure.
to rebuild under there, and,
Yeah.
yeah.
If you go to Powers, Oregon, that's a commonplace thing. We do that on about half the houses. If you buy a house, you put in a new foundation, because they're all wooden foundations from when timber was king. So anyway, I think there's another alternative up there in terms of preservation, and that's to put out a bid, see if somebody wants to get some grants and has a B energy to do something historic for the town and make money and improve the town's economic criteria. And then if that doesn't work, then you go forth, I think, with the other alternative of demolition. But I think we need to go through with that step first. That's not a question.
All right, does anybody else have any questions? Rob?
When you have approximate cost for demolition, it says excluding abatement and hazardous material abatement. What approximately would abatement cost potentially be?
Abatement as compared to demolition?
No.
You mean abating
well, if
just
even
a
if
hazard?
Well, you have a $17,000 approximation for demolition, excluding whatever additional would be required for abatement of hazardous materials. So how much could that be?
Yeah, that's not, it really depends on what's there, of course. With lead, which it certainly likely has in terms of the paint, the EPA rule is if you disturb more than 3 square feet, then you need to, get the monkey suits and everything else that, to put on and do that. So that's, that would need to be determined. The asbestos piece comes in, but unfortunately we don't have a specific number, but it's a routine process. So it's not like it's going to require, bringing in somebody from Portland or Eugene or something like that to do it. But I wouldn't be confident in giving you a number today on just the abatement.
Okay. So I have another question. It just seems like when we're comparing figures, approximately 150 versus whatever that demolition would actually be. Would it be 17? Would it be 27? Could it be 37? I don't know. 17 sounds low, and 27 or 37 is not as low. So it just, that's a figure that would have been helpful, I guess, and would still be helpful if we're going to make comparisons. So I have to ask one question. So if the HPSC had not made this motion to potentially, basically to pay attention to this building or preserve it or whatever, would we, the city, have just essentially just let it fall down? Because it certainly seemed like that's the direction it was going.
Well, it is true that the city has not invested any resources in maintaining the structure. There's no doubt about that. Other than removing the deck that is on that east side, we have had some instances where unhoused have tried to access the building. They broke in the front door a couple of years ago and things like that. So we put a little bit of money, but in terms of the structure and paint and removal of debris on the roof, I mean, no, you're correct. We haven't. Would we just let it fall down? I mean, we have codes that say you can't create a hazardous condition to the public. So that's why we took the deck off. We didn't feel it was to the point that tomorrow it's going to collapse on somebody if they're walking by it. So in terms of mitigation of a hazardous structure, we have an ordinance on that, but it hasn't really reached to that level. So it looks like Aaron's got some other thoughts.
Yeah, great question, Councilor Pell. And one of the things we were doing, we've been talking about this building for the past couple of years. And In anticipation of also the next subject matter that you'll be discussing, recognizing the condition of this building, without HBSC's recommendation, likely we wouldn't have just waited for it to fall down. We would have come to you and looked at a demo permit for that to be demolished in association with a redesign of the maintenance yard up in that area. So that would have been the combination. And on the price, you're right there. You got 150 and you got 17. I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers could be doubled in both categories. I think the takeaway between that is that you're looking at one is a much larger cost than the other as just an original comparison.
Vanessa?
In terms of the historic grants, do you know typically how much those are? If they're $1,000 a grant, or if they're more substantial than that?
There's a number of different programs that can be much more substantial than that. You're normally not going to get them to contribute more than 50%, and usually less than that of a cost. But if a lot of times it pays for looking at a preservation architect, paying for those kind of costs, actually preparing plans, design plans. So no, it can be more substantial. It can really assist, but some of it, it just depends on the competition in that particular year too. Since it's not like we're guaranteed, there's competition for those funds throughout the state.
Any other questions? All right, I was going to say, I think that we had this on the agenda before the HBSC motion, so that's maybe what triggered them to make the motion, but not the other way around, dealing with what to do with this building. All right, looks like we don't have any questions. Discussion on what you'd like to see happen. I know Valerie mentioned moving forward with the SHPO process and collecting public input. Joel had some questions about standards for local landmarks and that process. Joel?
Well, it seems like where we're at this point in time is we need the public input. We do need to have the other option up there of involving the private sector along with grants as part of people reacting to that public input or us getting that public input. But I'm not sure that we need to make a decision today and have that public process, which is needed anyway, but make sure and expand the range of alternatives to include the private sector as it suggested and the grants. But the private sector would be responsible for getting those grants. The city would not be responsible for them.
Rick?
I guess after the tour of the building, I don't have any real affection for it, and I don't see where the building in itself has attributes that, to me, would require or warrant, in my opinion, preserving it. So I can see the direction going forward as possible removal, because when we start looking at these costs up here, I think given economic times, it's not appropriate. But conversely, if the private sector wants to step forward and incur the costs, I think they should be given that opportunity, and I don't have a problem with that. Thank you.
Brian?
I agree with Rick.
That just brings me to a question, because basically it is on our property. So even if a private person put for a grant, actually, we would still own it, correct? So technically, the grant probably would have to come through us because it's on our property, and then afterwards, we could lease that to somebody. Am I understanding that correctly?
Likely on the historical preservation process and those grants that are applied, we would need to be the name on the grants because we would be just leasing the property ultimately, potentially. So, yeah, we'd have to be involved in the grant process.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make that clear, because you can't actually ask them to build on our property and whatever. So anyway, I think that just the whole public process has to go forward, and through that public process, I think we'll learn a lot about people's affinity for that particular building, and whether there's that strong support for the building. I think if people go and take a look at it, I think, I'm not against putting, taking pictures and photographs and having some sort of national landmark and including that as part of the park thing, but I just don't know whether looking at the condition of the building, it's really worth pouring a lot of money into. So I agree, just moving forward with the process and going through SHPO is important.
DJ? Not sure if he can, he says he agrees with Rick. Dwayne?
Kind of agree with everybody that spoke already, and I've just done 2 remodels down to the studs, and I've reviewed that building, and I have a lot of concerns with the condition it's in, the price to renovate it, and the look of the building and what value that has for the city. So I think we have a process first before we can all vote on what we want to do with it, and I just agree with everybody else. We should have those hearings with the public, even though we know some of the public doesn't. They might like it, but that doesn't mean it's economically the way to go. So, but I think we have a process we need to do first before we do any voting on anything. Thank you.
Brad, do you know if this public input process, does that need to be a public hearing at a council meeting? Does it need to be like an info session and a more casual event?
Yeah, SHPO doesn't, specify exactly what that looks like, because each property is going to be unique for each jurisdiction. So we have quite a bit of latitude to kind of design a public engagement process that is appropriate for this building. A public hearing is required, as I mentioned, before HBSC for any demolition or for any significant remodel or for relocation. Any of those, the code does require that. It doesn't require that public hearing before council. So if council wants that, we could certainly do that, but the code doesn't actually require that.
Okay, so if we were to gather public input, council, how do you want to go about doing that? Are you thinking a survey or a hearing during a council meeting or an info night? Val?
Well, it has to go before the HBSC, right? No matter what. So that is a public hearing in a sense, is a public hearing. So we could, I guess you could do it at if it has to go before them, put it through them, we can attend and put it out there.
To go through HBSC if we have an action, a specific action, like if you're going to either demo or do a major remodel. So that's when you would have it go through them. Right now, I think what we're looking for from a SHPO perspective is getting compliance that you have reached out to the public, whether you hold a forum, a small town hall type of meeting, a listening session on this subject would probably suffice also, and then we could report back to you on what the findings were on that.
That kind of makes more sense since we're basically doing it for SHPO. So I would think some sort of a forum might be good. I don't know if you can have it at the location.
There's nothing that states you can't have it. You have to have it here, so we could technically have it at the location, although from a standpoint of documentation of it, it might be good to have it to where we can have a recording, but we could have it out there.
Well, it sounds like at this point, we're gathering public feedback to get input to decide a direction, whether people have any interest in seeing it preserved or removed, right?
So maybe just having a time that it's open and just send out if people are interested in coming to look at it. Because I think that's part of it. It's part of the big decision is once you look at it and you realize the condition it is and you realize how much money it will take to, it's really easy to think, oh, that's really important. But then you're looking at it kind of going, wow, that could take a lot of money.
Rob?
Yeah, I would think that we, sort of like what was available today, there could be a time when the public is invited to tour it, and then an hour later we have a hearing, in these chambers, So people have two opportunities. The only question to me would be how we would advertise that. The question just to me is the advertising, whatever we choose, the advertising. But I would think people could tour it, and an hour later we would have a hearing at City Hall.
Dwayne?
I'd be okay with that. I mean, I think people need to visually see it, not some pictures, because pictures are not going to do you any good unless you walk through it and kind of see the condition is and point some things out in the floors and the walls and all the different problems with it. So I would agree with Councilor Pell.
Okay, sounds like we're looking at an open house followed up with a meeting. Joel?
Well, I respect Dwayne, and certainly you're not going to sell it as a house. But you look at Ireland's over at Gold Beach, those cabins are in very similar shape. You look at the lodges on the Rogue River where you stay overnight, they're in worse shape. And both those are historic structures that are going to be maintained, and they're maintained by the private sector. And that they will, so anyway, it depends on what you're used to and what you're looking at. It certainly isn't going to be a house on the market, and but that doesn't mean it couldn't be viable as a commercial opportunity.
Okay. So it sounds like what we're doing is an open house with a follow-up meeting, and any further questions from staff, comments from council? All right.
How are we
Rob?
going to advertise that, was the question.
I think it depends on when it is maybe, but
Well, we have, multiple routes that we can do on that. We have the social media channels that we have used that have been getting, pretty good returns for us, the Facebook and the others. We also have, the courier that we have used in the past. We can put up A-frame signs, which honestly, it may sound a little old-fashioned, but just some A-frame signs kind of around the park that say, here's the forum. Tour is going to be at this time. Will actually also capture a lot of people. So I think there's normally on something like this, we wouldn't do a direct mailing just because how do you select who those get the mailing? But those are some of the other ways we could go.
Yeah, I'd like to see us do a pretty good job advertising, only because, this is the first step, or the step that SHPO needs to see, and we really don't want to have any either regrets or accusations that the public didn't have a chance or whatever. So I'd like to make a little bit of a big splash. Anyone who shows up gets to see it. They're, developers or commercial opportunity people get to see it. And then from that point, we can move forward with, and not have to look back and say, geez, we have to show it again, or it needs more advertising. So I'd like to do it in all those places, and then we don't have to look backwards.
all right, on to the next item. Park maintenance shop.
Good morning, Council. Josh Hopkins, Park Superintendent, here today to discuss the Riverside Park Maintenance Shop. It kind of goes along the lines of what we were just discussing with the Reed building. So this is updating council on the proposed plans for the Riverside Park Maintenance Shop expansion project. It's in relationship to council goals for maintaining, operating, and expanding our infrastructure to meet community needs by appropriately maintaining and expanding a public asset. For the background on this, the Riverside Park Maintenance Shop, its current footprint has been deficient in meeting of park maintenance needs for several years. Staff has expressed concerns over the vehicle ingress and egress, closed quarters for trailers and equipment, lack of material storage, site security, and a lack of covered space for sheltering of equipment and other materials. In December of 2022 or 2020, an in-house draft concept plan was created to begin the planning phase for the expansion. That was created by our former park superintendent, and then they left service with the city, and so the plan's just kind of been sitting there, and we've been revisiting it as we've gone, but we've had a few other projects like the stage and things like that that have kind of taken a higher priority. Then in 2022, the Ming assessment was finalized, and that identified approximately 68,000 in observed deficiencies and an estimated 65,000 in backlogs, and that was for the exact maintenance shop. And then there's also the equipment storage building, which had an expected 11,000 backlog for equipment maintenance storage. These are the two work buildings outside of the shop. And one side, you've got our main maintenance shop work building where we have the pull-through doors. That's designed to be a pull-through. With the way it's currently set, since we don't have fencing on the outside, when they were using the pull-through, it created some vehicle traffic issues with recreators on the other side of it. And so we stopped using that as a pull-through. Part of this project is going to be to expand the fencing to allow us to re-engage and use that pull-through the way it's intended. And then that's the other side where our maintenance shop is for just the storage building. It's a wood structure with metal framing and everything like that and siding. In that one, for the Ming assessment, it only reported an estimated 11,000 in a backlog, and then it recommended adding a fire or a fuel cabinet in there. We don't have one. We have one in the other shop, as well as doing something to upgrade the HVAC in there to allow for more airflow. And when it comes to the 68,000 that was put in there for the actual maintenance building, it was pretty solely focused on plumbing and fixtures for the restroom half of this building. It didn't really get into any of the other observed deficiencies that could potentially be on there. They really focused in on just the plumbing and the restroom side of it. And then when the Ming assessment went through, it had two things assigned to it. One was its observed deficiencies, and then one was the estimated backlog, 65,000 and 11,000. That backlog, as it was explained to me, was kind of created from a formula based off of the age of the building, usage of the building, and what materials were in the building. They then used that to calculate out what they would anticipate a backlog of maintenance to be. It wasn't that they went through and identified individual maintenance issues for that backlog. Here's an example of what the crew quarters look like. On one side, we've got the general office area where the workstation is, and then the other side is where we kind of have like a locker room type area for people to house their stuff. If we are looking to move forward, and when we do use this project to move forward, we'd look to do a little minor remodeling in here, and really this is more or less just to increase storage capacity and make the place look a little bit neater. As you can see, we've got maps and things like that strewn about. We need to do better as far as adding some sort of shelving to house these items in a little bit better way. Here we have the aerial view of our shop location. You can see the two trucks parked there have backed in. That's because of the ingress-egress issues. If they don't back into the shop, then they have to pull backwards out into the oncoming traffic flow of the parking lot's design. And that's created near misses in the past when it came to this. Additionally, one of the issues is as they're backing into the shop, it also creates a scenario where it's kind of creating more targets inside the shop. It increases the ability of having a near miss in there or some variation of a collision. The shop itself doesn't have any sort of exterior storage, like a pole barn type structure to house larger equipment like our tractors, so those end up staying outside in the yard in all weather environments, as well as it's got a huge lack of storage capacity for materials. That would be our soil, bark, things like that. We don't really have good locations for that, so they kind of just get dropped wherever they can be dropped. And when we don't have them stored on site, staff have to go over to Reinhardt Volunteer Park across the river to go pick up those materials. So it really decreases our efficiency. And then on the back side, towards the end, you can see where we've kind of got a little bit of a roadway coming. That was the old pull-through. And so the idea would be to extend our fencing to be able to use that pull-through again. And one of the other issues that we've kind of identified as something we'd like to address is currently our trash cans, our two dumpsters are in the parking lot area. As we go through with this project, we're going to design either a trash corral towards that pull-through area or design a spot for it to go inside the yard so we can get that out of the public view. And then we can, not be blocking our parking lot with the trash cans. Here is the draft concept plan that was created, and this is where it kind of starts tying into the Reed building. As part of this original concept plan, the idea was they could potentially use the Reed building as staff crew quarters. At this point, with the interior conditions of the building, it's not necessarily at a feasible move-in ready state, so it require a large investment from the city to be able to do that, especially concerning the environmental conditions that are likely inside. So with that, they had our fencing going out to the end of the Reed building, where you can see just off the pathway there from East Park, and then going all the way around. They did call out adding an equipment storage shed, as well as adding some storage bays for materials. We would likely shift those bays over a little bit, just to create easier access for people to back into them, so they don't have the building on one side from where it currently sits. Additionally, if council did move forward with demolishing the Reed building or relocating it to another location, we would likely go ahead and incorporate that footprint and extend out the fencing further, and that would greatly increase our yard space and get rid of a lot of our ingress egress issues, especially when we're moving trailered equipment around in that yard. If we did that, we might look to make a longer pole barn type structure so that we have more covered storage. One of the things we have now is in our metal building and in our maintenance shop, we have items stored in there because we don't necessarily want them to be in the rain, but they don't also necessarily need to be inside, so it's taking up valuable floor space, but that's our only location. So if we had more extended storage outside, it's not just allowing us to store our equipment under cover, it would allow us to store other materials that otherwise could be stored outside too. So key planning considerations that we've kept in mind, and we're obviously continuing to look at this project, would be to address the ingress egress for safety concerns, increase material storage for efficiency, increase the functional yard space to decrease the vehicle conflicts, and then secure dumpster storage and relocation outside of the public parking lot, and increase security lighting and cameras. One of the things I pointed out was that our lighting isn't the best when it comes to security at night. It would be great to be able to install some better lighting, especially anything that's kind of more motion censored, so we don't have lighting constantly going in front of the neighboring property owners. As well as we need to increase our security cameras in this location in general. We've got more upgraded security cameras that we've been ordering, and it'd be great to upgrade these as well. Then a little minor remodeling of crew quarters for improved working conditions. That's more just adding shelving and things like that so that their crew quarters is less messy. And then covered outdoor storage for equipment and materials. Those are really what we've been focusing in on. There have been, it's one of those things, we're still in the planning phase here. We've been talking about other items. One thing that was brought up was potentially adding some sort of loading bay type structure where you can back up to dump trash and things like that, so it'll limit the ability or the need for staff to throw trash into the trash can and lift it up. Those have their places. It just really depends on what type of yard space we have to work with. And yeah, kind of goes back to that Reed building conversation. If we have a lot more yard space to work with, we'd be able to look at more of those alternatives. So for a call to action, we can plan to get an RFP to council approximately the first quarter of 2024. And then for cost implications, we've got 6395, which is the Riverside Park improvements. It's got a cash balance of a little over $385,000. That project code, as mentioned several times, has been earmarked for potentially using the Reed Building, Park Maintenance Shop, and the Riverside Stage. The Riverside Stage, we are expecting to draw down that funding a little bit as we go through. We'll know more once we put the stage out, but we just understand that the Isaac Walton Fund is probably not enough to cover the full cost of the stage. And then the URA has the $1.7 million identified for Riverside Park improvements. And with that, if that's what we decided to use for this, we just need to clarify what exactly improvements we're looking at for that project. And then for the alternatives, we'd be looking at providing staff with this direction to proceed or not proceed with the project, or move for an additional workshop for further review and cost estimating recommendations. If we are going to proceed with the planning that we've been doing, we would essentially just be reaching out to Public Works to make sure that we're incorporating what we can from the Ming assessment. One of the nice things about doing a project like this is we should be looking to incorporate as much as we can into it, because we don't do these types of large-scale remodels or renovations of our existing shop facilities frequently. And then we'd be working with facilities or with the engineering to create more of a plan for getting bid documents in order. As kind of mentioned during the Reed building presentation, a large part of where we're going to go kind of comes with what the council decides to do with the Reed building. By putting this out to the first quarter of 2024, it gives us plenty of time between now and then to have some sort of direction as far as whether or not we're going to be extending out our fencing or if we're going to keep with the current fencing plan that you guys have in front of you. And with that, let's open up for council questions.
Council, any questions? Valerie?
Yeah, can you tell us right now what exactly, where do we have maintenance buildings in our parks currently?
Currently, we have maintenance buildings at Reinhardt Volunteer Park and Riverside Park.
So that's where all of the equipment is stored and all of the materials are dumped and come from, there's those two parks, for all of the parks?
Correct. And then in some of our park locations, depending on what we're doing, we'll have vendors just deliver materials to it. Like if we're barking a tree well at Redwood, the vendors will just go deliver it at Redwood. But when we're looking for like staging, and those are our two largest parks, as well as the two parks that have dedicated staff working out of those specific locations.
Joel, then Dwayne?
Josh, good presentation, thank you. So we've done a previous study on deferred maintenance, including parks, and I would assume some of this would be deferred maintenance, so it goes beyond that into capital investment. But my question is, how does this, taking a step back, how does this compare with the need for all the parks, all the park maintenance, and the deferred maintenance? What's the priority of this, given the previous study that Jason did on deferred maintenance and where we were at with the other projects as well? And I realize there's different funding sources.
So with the Riverside Park Improvement Project, we've got a couple of deferred maintenance lists we've operated out of. There's the Ming assessment. As far as the park yard itself, it was really focused in on just plumbing, which is where it put its kind of rubber stamp on these are the plumbing issues you guys would need to fix. And that was really geared towards the restrooms that we renovated. With the rest of the parks, it was very similar. A lot of what they were looking at was more mechanical side of things for that Ming assessment, not necessarily like functionality or operational efficiency. It was really geared towards like, here's the nuts and bolts of our facilities, and here's what you guys need to be repairing or planning to repair in the future. And the scope was a little narrowed in that aspect. When it comes to our park deferred maintenance plan that we've reviewed with our parks committee and things like that, this project itself wasn't listed on that plan. I think that was specifically because it was already established as a project in a capital project code. But with that, part of this project is talking about we'd be looking at resurfacing the parking lot. Riverside Park's parking lots are one of the ones that was called out on that plan. Additionally, as part of this project, we'd be looking at doing what we need to do to get the restroom back up and going. Fixing the restroom was also a part of that plan. So this project would hit several key areas on our deferred maintenance list. It's just not actually called out on the deferred maintenance list.
So with that, do you have a sense then of the priorities of this with the other deferred maintenance projects? For example, the maintenance of the parking lot versus the maintenance of the parking lot on the boat ramp or other areas of the park?
So,
or other parks?
Part of the fun thing about parks is everyone's personal favorite part of a park is their number one priority of that park. In this case, this would be a pretty high-ranking priority for us because not only does it increase safety of our public that are using that parking area and the park location, increases the safety of our staff, especially with the ingress and egress issues with our vehicles. Additionally, it'll decrease the amount of, once we increase security measures, potentially decrease the amount of like break-ins and vandalism, things like that occur. Getting the restrooms up and going in that area would be a big benefit for the community. So there's a lot that gets hit by this project. And, it's hard to say that this is more important than replacing a ball field somewhere because the ball field people are going to say that this is number one priority type of a thing. But from our perspective, it's definitely one of the highest priorities in our parks.
Yeah, everything's a number one priority. It's hard to, I know there's valid reasons for the project, and it's hard to stack that up against other projects as well because they're number one priorities too. The other question I had was, I'm used to multi-funding things that like computers, computer services and things like that, where you have more than one beneficiary benefiting function pay in to support that. And maintenance areas or storage areas for maintenance can be very similar to, you can have several different benefiting functions. So you got the storage for the police and the fire, they got their own right now, which is probably appropriate. You got streets, you probably got things I haven't even thought of, and you got parks. So when you look at the synergy that may or may not be associated with having a multifunctional storage area, big picture across the city as to where we store equipment, and looking at the long-term needs, how does that play into what you're proposing today, or does it? It's probably something we haven't thought about with a lot of energy, I would guess.
So as it stands, pretty much all the departments have some variation of storage space out at the main public works yard. Capital assets being what they are, they're not necessarily things that we have that we can just throw in a dumpster or donate without going through a public process. So we end up with lots of storage as any department goes throughout a city. With this project, the idea is traditionally Riverside Park has had its own maintenance shop, same with RVP. They're our two largest parks. We have a need constantly for the mowers and everything in those locations. We're not like the streets department or other public works departments that are being shot out to all over the city for that specific purpose. Like, it's housed in that location and requires that amount of service in that location. Additionally, what this does is create a branching location for our South Park run. Our park system's broken out between North Parks, Reinhardt, South Parks, and Riverside Park. So it's not just that Riverside Park operates out of there, it's that our South Park of the river operates out of there, and it's just much more efficient for them to have some place to go on that side of the river, whether it's breaks, storing their own equipment, or material storage. It allows them to go to that direction.
Kind of like a substation. So
Yeah.
then, if I understand you correctly, that machinery that's stored there is not just used at Riverside Park, but all the South Parks?
A lot of it is, we have a couple of mowers.
And then is
that
it
doesn't-
duplicate, is that equipment then duplicated for the North Side Parks?
They store a lot of their equipment out of Reinhardt, basically North Parks reports to Reinhardt. And then we do share equipment back and forth. As one mower goes
Sure.
down, we may need to bring one over, and so there's a lot of trailing back and forth that happens as well. It's just a matter of
Yeah.
where they're generally housed for ease of access for that specific scheduled route is kind of north and south of the river. So it makes it a little bit easier for everyone to get to and fro.
Yeah, so that equipment then is shared across the city?
Shared across the Parks Department, not necessarily the
Yeah,
whole
right.
city. And then-
So those facilities are very similar to, if you think of the two facilities we're talking about, a great analogy would be the fire stations. Those two facilities, there's a lot of deployment from both locations, just like there's deployment from Hillcrest and Parkway and Redwood. So they all serve a purpose, and yes, there is sharing of equipment, but there is a lot of deployment from both of those, and so strategically, they're in pretty good locations.
Right, which I understand, it reduces your operating costs. But the one difference in the analogy that what you're doing is very important, but it's not an emergency like the fire department, where you have to get there within 5 minutes, response time. Anyway, thank you.
All right, JC, and then Brian.
Just want to add on to there because Public Works was brought up in their yard. So yes, those other funds, enterprise funds, water, sewer, transportation pay into those facilities. And if Jason was here, he'd probably tell you that they have their own project that they need to fund to redo those facilities because they have their own growth and other things that they have for a plan for that yard. Now, where we get back to the same with the fire department and parks as far as these projects, it's general fund money because these are general fund departments. And so we have cut those contributions to these kinds of projects because we've kept services going. So any sustainable approach or these projects, you'll have to make a priority on which one of these you may do.
Thank you. I appreciate you answering the hard questions.
Brian?
Thanks. So at this point, we have zero idea of what costs look like.
Not at this point. We haven't gone through that level of engineering on it or planning yet.
when would we have some sort of internal estimate? Is it going to be 100,000? Is it going to be 1 million? You know, just something to give us an idea of what we're looking at here.
As we proceed out through this project in the next few months, we'd be working with our engineering side of the city to get that type of cost estimate in place.
Okay. And the RFP to council approximately first quarter 2024, so we're talking 6 months to get that ready?
Some variation along that timeline. Again, part of it also depends on what council decides to do with the Reed building.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Josh. Council, discussion? Joel?
Well, I kind of go back to the solar policy where we need to know how much things cost before we approve them. And regardless of other people's policy, that's our council policy. I think it's a good policy. So I would like to just have the folks come back with a little better cost estimate, and then we can go from there.
Anybody else? Brian?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with Joel. I would like to proceed as though we're going to move forward. I think we probably all would like to move forward, assuming the costs are realistic.
Dwayne?
I would agree that having been worked at this already facility twice this year and been down there, there's several other parks, Fruitdale, Tussing, all of them work out of this Air Baker. They all work out of this small place, and it needs to be expanded. So I'd like to see at least something come forward just and see what the price is before we make a decision.
Anybody else? Y'all agree with that, Val?
I was just, basically, I agree with what's being said, is that we'll need numbers, and especially since, as JC mentioned, you know, our general fund is kind of lean at this point in time. So before we do anything big, we need to know what it's going to cost. But I think the whole process happens that we find out, read, do public hearing, SHPO, and go from there. But I would like to get an estimate, because I do agree that it needs to be done. It's just the timeline financially.
All righty, sounds like there's interested in getting this work done, so let's proceed both with Reed Building and working on getting an estimate so we can see how much this may cost. All righty, I think that moves us straight through to agenda review, doesn't it? Yep, okay. Agenda review, we have a Wednesday night business meeting this week. Council action items are an ordinance that would annex the Blackberry subdivision, an ordinance to put the public safety utility fee into action, a resolution to purchase a replacement fire apparatus, a resolution for Axon Fleet 3 car cameras, resolution for Pinnacle at the Meadowwood Waterline reimbursement, a resolution that would amend the comprehensive fee schedule and appoint a member to the bike committee. And then our next workshop would be the 28th, where we're looking at doing an executive session at the beginning of that meeting to get some information about property, assessment, real estate values, and then to have a follow-up workshop with discussion about the Allenwood and Skycrest properties, as well as to discuss Reinhardt Volunteer Park vegetation. Any questions, comments about those two things, Brian?
I would like to have the resolution amending the comprehensive fee schedule removed from consent, please.
Okay, that's on Wednesday.
So just to butt in there, the only change for that is the potential public safety utility fee goes in there at a $0 rate. That's the only thing that that resolution does.
Yes, I'm well aware. Thank you.
Is that going to be a starred presentation item or going to council action item?
Whatever we have to do to vote separately on that.
Okay, so remove it to council action?
Well, I'm confused, so basically I just want confirmation and understanding the process. So on the ordinance for public safety utility fee, what we're basically doing is establishing a fee structure. Am I correct? So
That
that's
is
what we're
correct.
doing. And so the CC on that is just amending the fee schedule to put that in the fee schedule? So it
Yes, if
seems
you
to me
take
like that's-
action and approve the item B, then under the consent, you'd have a follow-up as at least having a tag in the handbook of fees and charges that would allow for for you to adopt a fee also.
So it seems kind of, if we adopt the first one, which is the public safety utility fee, it would be kind of silly to vote the other one and vote no. I mean, yes, no? I mean, I don't know.
Well, true, but, or at another date, if you do approve the code for the public safety utility fee and not the handbook of fees charges, then you would just need to do that at a later date if you actually implemented it.
But we're not at this point actually setting a fee, we are just putting it in.
There is, yeah, that's a very, very good question, Counselor. Yes, the Wednesday night's meeting is not establishing any fee. It's establishing a structure for you to have the flexibility to charge a fee.
Thank you.
I think technically it establishes a $0 fee, right? Okay, you want it pulled off consent, and
Does one counselor have the ability to do that?
yes, I mean, I think that's what we've done in the past. If somebody wants something pulled off consent, then that's what we've done.
Okay, I would appreciate that.
Okay. Anything further? Okay, and are there any items that you would like to add to a future agenda? Vanessa?
I had a question on the October 2nd workshop. I see minimum density is on the agenda, and I was just curious to learn more about that.
Yeah, that was something that came up at the agenda setting meeting last week, and I think it was, Dwayne, did you ask for that?
Yeah, basically what it is, at the last home builders meeting, and this will be the joint home builders meeting as well, they had brought up the fact that they would prefer to have density be incentivized, because where they're running into problems with the minimum density things on certain lots where they can't do things because, so nothing will be built on those lots because there's something that's holding it up. So basically, with the home builders there, we thought that would be a great time to have that discussion as to what the problems they were having with that, so we could talk about how we might need to change it if possible.
Okay, any other questions? Rob?
Yeah, do we have anything scheduled? I don't see it for discussing an employee engagement or satisfaction survey that the council wanted to put out. Have we worked on that, or is there any space for that?
I don't think so. It's my understanding that's going ongoing. Aaron?
Yeah, we're further working with the third-party consultant to develop a draft for us, and we can get that draft to council to take a look at for what we'll be implementing for that satisfaction/stay survey for the organization.
Do you know what the timeline is?
It'll be, it's maybe a month and a half away or something like that. It won't take a super long time. So if you wanted to schedule something in 2 months, we'd probably be safe doing that.
A month and a half to have the draft ready?
Or I can do a memo first and then go from there.
Okay. Is there a preference, Rob?
Well, I'm just curious. I mean, we do want a third party to handle this. I'm wondering if the third party wants to hear it all from council, or we're going to do it the other way. We're going to hear from the third party, and then we respond. I just don't know which is more efficient, but I suppose we can wait to see what the third party has to say, and then we can make our suggestions from there. As far as when, I guess what it's appearing as though we've managed to chew up another year without doing that, but somehow, amazingly. But I guess we can wait to hear what staff brings back from whoever it is they think they want to hire for that assistance.
Joel?
New item, are we through with Rob's item?
I guess so.
Okay. On the parks and the park vegetation down at Reinhardt, which is the invasive species, mainly blackberry, I would like to suggest maybe that we expand that to include fire reduction and what I call desired future condition of our riparian area. And that includes things for like salmon, fuel reduction. The tree committee has been talking about a desired condition along the riparian area of the Rogue River of large tree structures. And so like by the water treatment plant, by maybe helping homeowners establish a large tree component in the riparian area, and getting rid of some of the invasive species like blackberry. It'd be much more beneficial to wildlife to look at it in all at once rather than just piecemeal it with different subjects. So that riparian area for not only recreation but for salmon and for fire reduction, and it's a little more comprehensive.
Did you say the tree committee was talking about that rather than parks?
What's that?
The tree committee was talking about the riparian
Well,
areas?
we're putting together an urban forest plan. That's part of the desired future along the riparian area of a large tree component throughout the city along the riparian areas. That would also be more shade and protect stream temperatures for the fish as well, and provide a better recreational experience, both for floating and for using our parks.
So maybe we want to give the tree committee as well as the park committee a heads up that that discussion is happening on the 28th?
Sure. I don't want to wear people out, but
Well, I think at this
could do
point,
that.
we probably need to keep it to Reinhardt, but it is having to deal with the embankment area,
Well, the
so-
other approach, depending on staff time, we could start with Reinhardt and use that as an example and then expand it throughout the rest of, to other parks and to private land. If that would be easier for staff, because it's a little more preparation than just the invasive species. And I'm okay either way. We need to be sensitive to staff time. So,
You have something, Aaron?
if you want to, I could help you with the presentation.
Well, I think that the conversation was not really just about removing blackberries, but about kind of the desired future use of the embankment. Is that correct, Brian? I think it's your topic, like opening up the river access. So it's not really specifically about blackberries. Blackberries are just part of the problem that's in between the river and the shore. So sounds to me like the riparian tree conversation is appropriate. If anybody, obviously this is 2 weeks out now, but maybe just make sure that the tree committee give them a heads up as well as parks and.
Certainly, we'll do that. I think maybe Councilor King's subject matter is a bigger, different, when we'll stay focused with what the original intent of this was, but also include both chairs as an invite from the Parks and the Tree Committee.
Sounds good. It's a good start anyway.
Yeah, and there are specific riparian rules, am I correct? I mean, so I would imagine to a certain extent that would also be part of the conversation.
Okay. Anything else?
I have.
Aaron?
I just have one item, not to go back to the pulling on consent. The two ways to do that, to vote separately, would be to star, consent it, vote on it separate, or send it to council action. And the only comment that I would have is from a staff perspective and agenda reorganization, it's much easier for us to do a star, vote on it separately, keep it on consent, but you'd vote on it separately versus changing it into council action. It's just a little more work for us from an agenda perspective.
And council action would have public comment. Is that something you're wanting public comment on?
I think we can take public comment on the other item earlier in the evening, so as long as we're able to vote on that item separately and just make it a start item, that's fine.
Okay, thanks. Anything else? Yeah, JC?
Yeah, previous to the weekend, staff pushed out a potential website for mayor and council to look at, and we were wondering about feedback and potential timing of making that live.
Val?
I was just saying, I was a little confused, but I did go in and read it, so I know it had some special code, and that was what really threw me off. But the code was there, but I didn't have to go to the code to get there. You were just showing me, because I was able to read it all the way through. And that confused me, because I thought, well, I'm supposed to go someplace secret, but then I never found that secret place to go.
So yeah, the website is live, but it is not necessarily approved by council. And so we wanted to put it in a place where no one would potentially Google it and pull up without your consent of actually putting it out there for the public to view.
So now we're going to have a bunch of people trying to find the secret code.
It's the Easter egg. Okay, check your email, look at the website. I've been out of town for a few days, so I'm not sure what you're talking about, but
But we
I'll
are
check
ready
my
to go
email.
live with that. It is an addition, it's an addition for you. Council's made it clear that you'd like to have some additional information out there when it comes to public safety funding.
Yes.
And that's what this is,
Yes.
that opportunity. And as soon as we get your green light, if you think that's acceptable, we can make it go live on the main website.
Yes,
Okay.
I did look at it, and I felt it was a good job, but it was kind of that whole thing that confused me in the very beginning.
We tried to do it at least in a timely manner to where potentially we can have it go live before Wednesday night, or at least Wednesday night you can say, oh, there's also, if you take a look at our web, there's a lot more information on this subject matter.
Gotcha. Okay, so reply back to the emails. That way they can get it going before Wednesday night. You don't need to reply all, though. Okay, anything else? All right. Valerie?
I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
Seconded by Vanessa. All in favor of adjourning today, say aye.
I
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, see you Wednesday night.